Joe Biden's tone deaf tweet talking about how, just like we drew it up, Joe Biden's team obviously making jokes about how the Democratic Party is actually responsible for the Super Bowl being rigged so that they can help, so that Taylor Swift can go on the field and kiss Travis Kelce, who's a liberal, and then they can say vote for Joe Biden or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what kind of right-wing mania will come out of this. I mean, I'm excited to see. I'm a little worried. I assume there will be at least a couple people that end up, if things go as they have so far, at least a couple more right-wing QAnon guys are going to go and do YouTube live streams of their patricide decapitations or whatever, as the media conveniently ignores that and rarely discusses it, so they can yell about, I don't know, a couple of migrants in New York that got beat up by cops or whatever. But
right.
I wanted to hear your perspective on this. What do you think? What do you think will happen, I guess, in the American election, considering how Biden has been received so far by even the Democratic Party, and how he has treated the situation in Gaza thus far?
Yeah, I think Biden is holding tight to the strategy that, hey, being lockstep with Israel has never failed an American president running for office, right? Like you don't lose an election because of your stance on Israel, because of your fidelity to Israel, right?
Yeah.
So he's taking that posture, but I think with every campaign, whether it's cast lead, whether it's protective edge, as the campaigns continue, the access we have to what's happening on the ground continues to expand, and as a result, more and more people are frustrated, and so you now see young voters who aren't going to support this. You see progressive and radical voters who aren't going to support this. Are they going to vote Trump? Probably not, although, an argument could be made by some people that at least he was not an interventionist in a certain kind of way. I think what you're going to see is a lot of people who just stay home. You're going to see a lot of people who vote third party. You're going to see a lot of people who are just dissatisfied. And then, if you look at even in Michigan, where, he was going to Dearborn and Ann Arbor and other places, and the Arabs were like, yo, no. No. There's nothing you could tell us to make us vote for you. There's absolutely nothing you could offer us that makes sense. And so don't even show up, right? I think there will be a lot of people who may not have that explicit claim or that explicit warning to the president, but their voting patterns will be the same. And so I think Palestine, I think Gaza in particular, is going to be an issue that severely impairs Joe Biden's ability to successfully run for president.
Yeah. I guess my opinion on it is that...
Hey, give me 5 seconds. I just got to let somebody into my door. I just realized.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
I can hear you still.
Well, yeah, no, it's fine. I'm gonna be talking anyway to my chat, but what I've said over and over again, I think, is that it's not even just that Biden isn't sufficiently pro-Israel or sufficiently anti-Israel, but rather Biden's wishy-washy approach to Israel, as on the one hand he talks about how Israel needs to cut it out, Jack, but also simultaneously offering massive weapons packages and behind closed doors seemingly offering no red lines, even though he claims that he's trying to get Israel to make concessions, in my opinion, shows a lack of having a clear-cut direction on the issue of Israel, which then makes him look weak. What do I mean by this? I mean, there has been polling done on the matter. Trump currently leads Biden by 10 points on the issue of Israel. Why? How is that even possible? Well, that's because, in my opinion, that when I look at those numbers, it's partially, one, because Trump is currently not president, right? So there's always a big benefit to that. And two, the second reason why I think Trump is leading Biden by 10 points on Israel is because Trump is consistent, at least, on the issue of Israel, whereas Biden shows inconsistency by claiming that he wants peace, claiming that he wants a two-state solution, as Benjamin Netanyahu routinely undermines him. So I think it plays into Biden being too old and asleep at the wheel, and the narrative that his biggest weakness, basically, is that narrative. I think the way he's handled this issue plays into that as well. Not to say that voters are single issue voters on Israel Palestine. I mean, maybe in Michigan, but some
Most
some
are,
in
yeah.
Michigan. But overall, like, it's not. Americans don't give a shit at all.
Right. That's 100% true. That's 100% factual. And, you know, the thing about Biden is, yeah, he's asleep at the wheel. And I'm sure lots of things are getting past him. But he, more than maybe any U.S. president that I've seen in my lifetime, because Reagan didn't give a shit about this. Reagan was trying to punt on Israel every chance he got. George H.W. Bush was probably one of the stronger people on Israel. Obama, you know, wasn't exactly a profile in courage, but he at least was willing to to punt a little bit. You know, he was willing to abstain from UN votes and such. But Joe Biden's like, I'm a Zionist.
Oh yeah,
he's an unabashed guy. Yeah.
Have you heard the reports? Like, I think it was like in the 90s or something. Like after the beginning of the Lebanese invasion, where he was like, yeah, no, I would do even more. I would be even more genocidal. Like he was to the right of Israel at a certain point on these issues, which is like crazy.
It's wild. I didn't even know that was possible, but he absolutely was. And so when you have that kind of position on the matter, it takes a lot. It takes a lot for him to be willing to restrain. The U.S.'s position basically since after the Suez Crisis. I mean, really, that's probably the last moment of major U.S. resistance to Israel was 1956. Since then, the U.S. has only grown increasingly lockstep with Israel in all things. And the tactic and the strategy is now is to not show any disagreement. That there's not an inch of daylight, that they're shoulder to shoulder, all the stupid metaphors. Yeah. And so, you know, Biden already has that against them. But you'd hope that behind the scenes he'd be pressuring them. And from what I hear, there has been some behind the scenes pressure for a ceasefire, but the U.S. has no leverage. The U.S. has literally no leverage. And while he certainly wants to court left-wing voters, and he certainly wants the young college students to say, hey, we're on board with you, he's far more concerned with looking weak on this issue. He's far more concerned with Trump being able to move him, Trump being able to move him, because if Trump moves him on this issue, you run the risk of Jewish American voters who overwhelmingly vote Democrat of saying, look, times have changed. This is an extreme exception to our rule, but we're going to go Trump. That's another worry that Biden has, or just that the general centrist voter who sees this issue as a sign of a bigger unrest in the Middle East, and they're worried about Iran, and they're worried about this, and they're worried about that. And they're going to say, you know what, we're sorry, we have to go elsewhere for our vote. I think Biden is more concerned with that than losing the extreme left wing or than a 19-year-old college student vote. And so Biden's in a tough spot here as somebody whose primary interest is in, you know, controlling the empire as opposed to making the world better. And I think that's why you're seeing such a weird kind of calculation here where they're starting to whisper. I mean, Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, has always kind of said, you know, to Israel, hey, like, if your goal is to get rid of Hamas, this ain't the way. I think Anthony Blinken has become increasingly vocal as well. And now in the aftermath of the ICJ decision, they can at least just parrot what the ICJ says, hey, just take all cautions, right? To make sure this isn't happening. And I think that's given them a language and a kind of escape hatch to talk about this thing in a different way. But ultimately, I don't see Biden saying anything significantly different.
I don't know why you're... wait, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but you said that America has no leverage. I actually disagree on that. I do think that America has a lot of leverage. I think that at least the American track record has shown time and time again that, like, when America makes a phone call and tells you to cut this shit out, like, Israel usually follows through. There was a point early on when Yoav Gallant was the defense minister, was questioned in a press briefing in Israel as to why they were allowing food trucks and humanitarian supplies to actually go into Gaza, because originally they had blockaded it, if you recall. And Yoav Gallant said, well, America said we have to do it, so what can we do? And I think that has been consistent. Biden has actually stopped in 2021, made a phone call and told them, it's over, cut it out, we're done, to stop the bombing campaigns. And I do think that if we wanted to, like the United States, if we collectively wanted to put an end to this, I think we have a lot of leverage.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. Yes, the U.S. has actual leverage. I mean more as a practical matter, given what they're not willing to do. If the U.S. right now said, hey, the 17 million or the 14 million hinges upon you all
billion,
excuse me, hinges on you all acting right, then yeah, sure. If they said, if you don't do this, we're going to publicly rebuke you, of course. If they said, look, we're going to use our UN Security Council power and authority and vote to rebuke you all, then sure. But I'm saying we know that the U.S., even at its most quote unquote courageous, is only going to abstain. We know that they're never going to condition money on anything. And I think Netanyahu knows that Biden is vulnerable here on this issue. I'm saying as a practical matter, Biden doesn't feel like he has much leverage.
Yeah, and it's wrong. And that's the issue. And I think that is literally translating even to apolitical voters who don't give a fuck about Israel in general as weakness. Why does it portray as weakness? Because all of these like quote unquote leaks that come out from the Biden administration of like, oh, he said Netanyahu's a son of a bitch behind the scenes, or he's like very upset at Netanyahu, like all this shit actually reads as him being a bitch, because Benjamin Netanyahu does not care about Joe Biden, regardless of how much of a rugged Zionist Joe Biden has actually been. Benjamin Netanyahu very openly does not give a shit, and has kind of done his very best, I would say, to ensure Biden's chances of re-election are diminished from the limited positions that he has by regularly going on television and saying the exact opposite of what Biden is saying the day prior. Like Biden will be like, there's going to be a two-state solution. Like there has to be. Benjamin Netanyahu goes on television and says, there will never be a two-state solution. It's done. We're not doing that. That's not going to happen. And then they go back to Biden. They say, what's going on? You said there's going to be a two-state solution. Benjamin Netanyahu says there won't be. Biden comes across even more old and more feeble and more senile, where he's like, oh, well, there will be. There's different kinds of two-state solutions. So I think like that's why there is this in the minds of the American public who care about the optics more than anything else, and certainly don't care about like brown children being pummeled with our munitions overseas, because that's the American way. I think that they do see an old man asleep at the wheel, and this reinforces that narrative. And I think it's a major misstep, even if I were to, I guess, put on my Democratic Party consultant hat for a brief moment here and talk about it from like the upcoming election and how it looks and how it reads. Horrible way to go about it.
Oh, I think it's an absolute awful way to go about it. He would look better standing tall, but again,
he would be better. I said this too. He would be better if he was like unconditional support for Israel. Like if he's just saying like, no, Israel has a right to defend itself over and over and over again, and didn't go above and beyond and like maybe talk about like dead babies or whatever. Or even if he did, I don't know. Ultimately,
he goes so to the extreme.
Yeah.
Of saying that he saw things and did things that just didn't happen, that I think he loses all credibility with left-wing voters. And again, he's never going to be seen as sufficiently tough to right-wing voters. And I think other people are like, mind your business, the Trump folks. So I'm not convinced that any of this works out well for him. And for Netanyahu, a Trump presidency is the ideal outcome, because Trump is willing to do whatever. Right, he was willing to actually not sign the waiver for the Embassy Act. He was willing to cut the funds for UNRWA. Now, again, Trump is not a new form of American foreign policy. He doesn't represent a shift in American foreign policy. He's just American foreign policy on steroids.
Yeah.
But it's still an important distinction to be made.
I think the major difference here, and I believe this wholeheartedly, I think Hillary Clinton was awful, but I don't think Hillary Clinton would have done two things. I don't think Hillary Clinton would have assassinated Qasem Soleimani, and I don't think Hillary Clinton would have ripped apart the Iran denuclearization agreement. I think like liberals oftentimes, with the exception of Joe Biden on the issue of Israel-Palestine, have a much more like still very bloodthirsty, but more restraint, more tactical way of engaging in American imperialism. Whereas
For
like
sure.
Republicans are very open and very honest, all the way from neocons to Donald Trump, who claimed to be a peaceful dove and not a war hawk, and try to present himself as such, while also, of course, greatly accelerating drone strikes and you know, an unauthorized assassination of a relatively important figure in a foreign adversary after throwing apart I would say the signature Obama era foreign policy achievement, the Iran denuclearization agreement.
Right.
So they like, I don't think Hillary Clinton would have, they would have definitely continued along with the Abraham Accords. It would have been a little bit different probably because that normalization already exists. They were just putting it on paper.
Yeah.
But overall, I think this is a big deviation on the liberal side of foreign policy with Joe Biden.
I mean, he's about as hawkish as a Democrat you're going to get in office. I mean, I can't imagine anyone more. Clinton ain't far, but I think Joe Biden doesn't even pretend. He doesn't even have the pretense of not being these things. You know, he's pro-cop, he's pro-war, he's anti-busing, anti-reparations. I mean, he's made enough of a case for himself that it's not difficult to make it clear to people that we're on the wrong side of this issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not good news. This is not a sign of optimism here. I feel ready to see another Trump presidency. And let me be clear, I don't want one.
Yeah.
I've just accepted that we're moving in the wrong direction and that we're likely going to see one. And that's going to mean a lot of things for a lot of people, but it's certainly going to mean hell for the Palestinians. And any kind of peaceful solution will be, I don't know. It'll be so remote. And frankly, by the time we have a November election, given what is happening in Rafah, and given the conditions that we see with more than 50% of buildings collapsed now, 1% of the child population killed and growing, 10% of the population either dead or maimed, 65% of we're going down the list. I don't know what's going to be left in November.
Yeah. It's liberals got abortion. They can keep pumping that. You know what I mean? That is the major motivator at this moment and will be coming up in the election cycle. But even then, that's I guess that's like taking advantage of a massive loss of civil liberties in this country, and there is never any positive messaging surrounding why you have to vote for the Democratic Party over the Republican Party, whereas the Republicans are running for re-election every single day and not just once every 4 years. And Democrats remember that they have to like win votes every 4 years and have no counter messaging for the issue of immigration, for example, and the country continues to go further and further right wing. With
reproductive justice is probably their best bet for that reason. It's like they're stealing your right to choose. But do men show up for that, right? The border stuff doesn't work. Education stuff doesn't work. This Palestine thing isn't going to work for a lot of mainstream voters. I mean, reproductive justice is one of them. The Supreme Court more broadly is still an abstract idea unless you have a concrete issue. Affirmative action ain't getting white people up. I'm not optimistic, man. I got to run. But we got to do this again soon, bro.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on, by the way. FD Signifier hooked this up.